Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and today I want to make a baby quilt, but I don't want to quilt it. I also want the quilt reversible with a nice big binding, but I don't want to bind it, and I want it quick and I want it easy. Can it be done? I'm going to start with 2 panels, and these panels are going to go together back to back. The one panel has the alphabet on it, and the one has numbers on it. And along the side, it actually has the words that you need to find the picture of. So it's sort of an I Spy quilt. Now this fabric is from Elizabeth Studios. And for the batting, I'm not using batting at all. I'm going to use flannel. Now I've washed this flannel and dried it twice. The reason is cotton flannel shrinks a lot different than a cotton fabric that you're going to quilt with. So I'm going to wash both of my panels and double wash my flannel. That way all of the shrinking is done right at the beginning. And for the binding, I'm going to need 1.25 yards, and the color blue kind of pulls out all of the colors in the panels. Before we do anything with the panel and the flannel, we're going to make that big binding. 1.25 yards is going to give you the length, which is usually somewhere around that 45-inch mark. 1.25 yards is 45 inches. So if you want, you can get a little bit more depending on how much you need to trim that panel down. What you need is that length plus some seam allowance. So I have 46 inches just to give me a little bit of extra. You need to iron this nice and flat and leave that fold because you're going to cut that fold off. So I have the fold and I have the 2 raw edges. Fold it in half so you match up that folded edge. And it'll be easier if you put that fold right there in front of you so that those folds match up on one side. I have my folded edges matched. So now I'm going to use this fold as my measurement. What you're wanting is that large fold along a straight edge. To get that straight edge, it's really easy. Take your nice big ruler, slide it in between your 2 layers until that ruler goes right along that fold. Now take that ruler and drag your fabric to a straight line. The edges of that ruler are going to hit a straight line on your mat. So I'll match one side, pull, and match the other side. So I know that that ruler inside that fabric is right along that straight line. Now gently, I'm going to take that ruler out without moving this top fabric. So I know that is straight. What we want to do now is divide this in half. We're going to want to put a cut down the center, a cut on each side, so that we take off of that fold and take off that selvage. To make it really easy, I'm just going to make them 10-inch strips. When I open it up now, I'm going to have 4 long cuts of fabric, and it went down the length of the fabric, not along the width. Take all of these borders, fold them in half, and press. I now have 4 long pieces with a folded edge, and they're 5 inches wide. We're going to put these aside and work on the quilt body. To prepare the quilt body, you're going to need your 2 panels cut at the same size and your flannel. Lay the flannel down and put the first panel right on top so that the right side is facing up. The next panel is going to go facing down, but before that we're going to pin on the big binding. By cutting the binding on that length of the fabric, you have no seams in that border. We're going to need to make these long strips a 1/2 inch shorter than the border. In my case, my long measurement is 41 3/4 of an inch. Take that measurement and subtract 1/2 inch. I now have 41 inches and 1/4. And mark that measurement. So I'm going to have a marking on each edge. You're going to take that measurement and you're going to fold it into itself and press it. And give yourself a nice big seam allowance. And you're not going to be stitching that. You're going to be pressing it down. So what I now have is one long piece. It's got a folded edge. When I open it up, I'm going to have two edges that are folded inside and pressed. You're going to have 1/4 inch on each side hanging over. Take the two raw edges and match it along the raw edge of the first panel and that flannel backing, and pin that border on. Take a second piece and do the same for the other side. And right here I have that 1/4 inch space. Take it to the machine and sew just a little piece down and come right off so you have that 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you're going to be able to see it on both sides. When you pin this, pin it so the pin heads are coming out, that they're not inside of the quilt body. Now you can stitch the whole thing if you'd like, or just those corners. I'm going to save time and I'm only going to do those corners. I now want to do the top sides. I'm going to do them the same way. When you have the two other sides done, that big folded edge is going to go right along that seam line. So you're going to have a little 1/4 inch square peeking out from that corner. Before I pin this down, I'm going to lift up and take that underneath border and pull it out of the way. So it's right tight against that seam right there in that corner. I don't want to pull it over the edge. I want to keep it inside the body of the quilt. And I'm going to pin that out of the way. Now I can lay that down and pin it. Take it to the machine and stitch 1/4 inch along that edge. And do that to all four corners. So there's a 1/4 inch seam on that last one you did. When you lift it up, you will see that 1/4 inch there with that piece out of the way. By having that piece out of the way, you've not accidentally stitched it into that seam. We're going to take this and pin this out of the way. So just fold it back and pin it out of the way so this corner stays nice and clean. So all of my corners are stitched down and those loose ends are tucked out of the way. Somewhere along the border, you're going to need to stitch the layers together. I like to do it somewhere on the bottom of the quilt. So I'm going to just do a 1/4 inch and stitch all of those layers together. That is going to be a turning point, but it's easier if you stitch it first. Take your other panel and lay it on top, matching the edges. And you're going to be able to just take those pins and transfer them through all the layers. And do that all the way around. I'm going to just stitch these layers together, but I'm going to stitch from the back side. That little row of stitching that I did along the bottom, it's going to be my stopping and my starting point. So I'm going to put my needle in one and I'm going to stitch all the way around, stopping at the other one. So I'm going to have an opening. By stitching on the back side up, you're going to be able to follow your stitching lines in that corner. So you're going to stitch right over top of those lines. By stitching on those lines, you're not going to catch that big binding inside. So let's stitch all the way around. I have all the edges sewn together, and I do have that little opening that I can turn it right side out. The pins are still in those corners holding those flaps down, so just be careful when you turn it right side out. If you want, you can get your hand in and take out the pins, then turn this whole thing like a pillowcase right side out. When I pull it right side out, I have these very strange looking corners. Those are the corners that the seam allowances has been pressed inside. And there is the opening where I turned the entire quilt around. I want to stitch that opening closed. From here, you're going to be able to take the iron and press the seams going down and press the seams going down this way. That way you'll have a nice smooth edge on both sides. Now we're going to do something a little fun with the corners. We're going to close up this corner. I'm going to use a different color fabric, but you can use a matching fabric or any fabric that you want. Start with a piece of fabric that you've cut the width of the fabric at 6 inches. Fold it in half and stitch all the way down so you're making one long tube. Turn the long tube right side out and press it. You're going to cut it into 4. You're going to have 4 flat tubes, 2.5 inches by about 11 inches long. You're going to take these long pieces, just fold it so it goes on an angle. Just pin that fold. Those corners are going to slide inside the corner. Because these were not stitched open, you have this big open tube. You're going to be able to open it up and slide the end in. Slide the second end in. And then just played with that a little bit so that you have an edge flat on both sides. And you're going to have a hole in a corner. Pin all the layers together. Now you can stitch down one edge and stitch the other edge. And those cute little corners now become little handles. And they look nice. And the corners are finished from both sides. And all the raw edges are inside. If you'd like, you can stitch down that corner if you want to keep it flat or leave it open. Another row up stitching that is optional is once you've pressed both of those sides over, you can just stitch right along that edge to hold all of those layers together. But again, that's optional. So I've stitched all the way around the edge, and I've just started on one corner and stitched down. I didn't need to stitch that area. Now I'm done. By adding the flannel inside instead of quilt batting, what it does is it still gives me a nice warm blanket, but I didn't have to quilt it. If there was batting inside, you would have to quilt all of these layers together, or that batting is going to shift inside. Now you can do the same project and totally omit the flannel if you'd like. It would just be a lighter blanket. So I've made a quilt without quilting it. A reversible quilt, a quilt with big binding and quick and easy. I do hope you give it a try, and as always, thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.